Who does Albert Breer think he is? He does. Joining us here from Sports Illustrated, our good friend Albert Breer, calling in from the Combine. How you doing, Albert? What's going on?
I'm not sure I take that, right?
You're a Hall of Famer. That's what I mean.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Are you at the Combine? Are you there?
I am. Yeah, I am. When are you guys getting here?
I get there tomorrow night. I hope to. If I'd sign a piece of paper to land before midnight, Tuesday night.
Okay.
Right now.
Okay.
So what are they talking about? What's all the gossip, the whispers? This is it.
Yeah, I mean, it's and Rich, you've been doing this for a long time too.
Yes, sir.
A lot of it, now there's stuff with the college kids, of course, and we'll all be talking about Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud and Anthony Richardson and Will Levis and Jalen Carter and Will Anderson, all those guys too. But I think the biggest piece of intrigue here is whether we have a domino or two in the veteran quarterback market fall this week, and Aaron Rodgers, whether he comes out and says something over the next couple of days. I know some people are anticipating that. The Derek Carr thing, could that accelerate? Because there are some pressure points there. And if Rodgers, leans one way or the other, it could affect what happens with Carr. And then, of course, there's the normal stuff with the guys who are going to be free agents, which is the meetings that are not supposed to happen, I guess. Right? Like where
Nice.
The Jimmy Garoppolo and Daniel Jones and Geno Smith, like all that business is starting to sort itself out. So I think that's the big thing, really. Like honestly, here is with all the general managers and head coaches, at least most of the head coaches here in Indianapolis, most people are curious whether or not over the course of the next 6-7 days, one of those dominoes or two of those dominoes fall. Now
I read this in your column, the MMQB in Sports Illustrated, Albert. Yep. You are the latest in our terrific business of reporting and information in the NFL to say this phrase, and I'm going to put it in front of you because I think you're the perfect person to put some meat on these bones. You say that Aaron Rodgers could be traded by the Packers because they have a different approach this offseason with Jordan Love being as developed as he is, and Rodgers potentially being ripe for moving on because he's, he needs to prove that he's all in. I've heard that over and over and over again. The implication is when you hear like if he's all in, the Packers are all in with him. What is not being all in, right? Like what does that mean all in? What form does not all in potentially take with Aaron Rodgers, Albert Breer?
Well, I think you have to remember, like there are a lot of people in that Packers organization who've been there long enough to remember what it was like in 2008 and remember what those years were like before 2008 when they were waiting for Brett Favre to either come back off the tractor or not come back off the tractor in Mississippi, and, eventually they got to a point where, it was like, we want a quarterback who's going to be around. We want a guy who's going to be locked in, who's, going to be developing chemistry with our younger players and leading us through some of the off-season work. It doesn't mean you have to be there every day. It's a bigger ask, obviously, for guys to be in Green Bay, Wisconsin than it is, per se, like the Dolphins coach asked for their players to stay in Miami, in the off-season. But, I think that there's that piece of it, like where 2 years ago they were waiting all the way up till the first day of training camp and kind of held hostage by it. And, last year, there was obviously no Aaron Rodgers for most of, and I can't remember if it was most or all of the off-season program, but he wasn't really around, and so like I think that's part of it is, where are you going to be around to develop chemistry with Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, and are you going to come back in the best shape of your life, all of that stuff. So I think that's definitely a piece of all of this. Where what the Packers are trying to do aligns with what Rodgers is trying to do and trying to accomplish. And we've seen it before, Rich, like where Brady had a incredible sense of urgency when he got to Tampa, and where Brett Favre had an incredible sense of urgency when he got to Minnesota. can you have that same sense of urgency if you are coming back to the same place, or does everybody need to change the scenery? I think that's sort of the best way I can illustrate the way that at least I see it based on what I know.
Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. So they're waiting for Rodgers. Is he the first domino to fall? Because Derek Carr doesn't have to wait, and teams don't have to wait for Rodgers to sign him either. So what's the deal there?
Yeah, and I think, honestly, I think put it this way, there's very strong interest between the Jets and Carr. And I do think, I know when they've met and they've talked over the course of the last 6-7 days, there's been an understanding there that Derek Carr wants to take his time and he wants to investigate all of his options. And, he may want to take another visit or two. And I think the Jets have been very upfront that they're looking at the entire quarterback market, and that includes Aaron Rodgers, and so, could it get to the point where the Jets, are able to siphon information where it's like, well, Rodgers doesn't want to go there, and maybe that accelerates something where Carr's the first domino? Certainly something like that could fall. And I'm not saying, by the way, I'll make this clear, that Rodgers has said that about the Jets at all, but I'm just kind of trying to paint the scenario where Carr could be the first domino to fall. I think there's an assumption that Rodgers is going to be the first one to fall because he's the big one, right? And so there are teams out there that are waiting on him. But you're right. If a team or two gets the sense, we're not going to be in it for Rodgers or, say, Lamar Jackson over the course of the next few days while everyone's here in Indianapolis, well, then that team could certainly move on Derek Carr a little faster than maybe they were last week.
All right, let's put a pin in what you just said, Albert Breer. Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show from Sports Illustrated, calling in from the NFL Scouting Combine. When this show comes on the air at noon Eastern Time in Indianapolis on Tuesday, Matt Eberflus will be at a podium talking, head coach of the Chicago Bears. What do you expect to hear from him about the first overall selection and all the questions surrounding Justin Fields? Albert?
I think what you're going to hear from him, Rich, is what behooves the Bears. And what behooves the Bears right now is to create the appearance that all options are open, right? And so, I think, they're going to meet with everybody, as every team does, over the course of the next few days. My expectation is that they're going to give Justin Fields another year as their starting quarterback and try to spin the number one overall pick off for capital. I do think, after talking to a few people over the last week, that they're going to be able to find good offers for the number one overall pick and ultimately move that number one overall pick, because there are a bunch of quarterback-needy teams drafting near the top. The Colts, the Panthers, Atlanta, I think, is at 8, right? Atlanta's right in there. So, I think that they're going to be able to get a good offer back. Here's what I think is most interesting about it that I don't think a lot of people are talking about.
Okay.
There are a lot of teams that feel like the two best prospects at quarterback in college football this past year will still be in college in 2023. Mm-hmm. And that's Caleb Williams from USC and Drake Maye from North Carolina. And I can tell you that part of this, if you're looking at it from the Bears' perspective, has to be, do we go all in on someone this year and trade Justin, who we really like, or do we give Justin another year, try to get him more help, get a clearer answer on him, trade the number one overall pick for a ton of capital, and if it doesn't work out, now we've got capital to go and get Drake Maye or Caleb Williams next year. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So, to me, I think there are teams, and I think the Bears are one of these teams, that aren't just studying this year's quarterbacks, they're studying next year's quarterbacks too. And, I can tell you every single person who's done that I've talked to over the last couple of weeks has told me that Williams and Maye will be the first two quarterbacks in this year's draft. And so, I think that that's a factor for everybody. I mean, you remember, Rich, and again, both you and I have been doing this for a long time, how Andrew Luck sort of loomed over the draft, not for a year, but for 2 years, right? Because he came back to Stanford. Mm-hmm. I sort of feel like, to some degree, Caleb Williams and Drake Maye, not to the extent Luck was, but to some degree, those guys are looming over this year's draft that way. And I think, to some degree, again, looming over what the Bears are going to do at the position as well, where they know that if it doesn't work out with Justin in 2023, there may be better answers for them in 2024.
Of course, the danger there, Albert, is that next year, what if next year's draft, the teams drafting 1 and 2 are quarterback needy teams? Then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much draft capital you're accruing this year. Pound sand.
But if you like Justin Fields, right?
Yeah.
And you think that there's potential, and Justin's got to grow as a passer, definitely. But we just saw a guy in the Super Bowl who grew a ton as a passer over his first 3 years in the league, and just from like a makeup standpoint and a leadership standpoint, like there are a lot of commonalities between Jalen Hurts and Justin Fields, just in who they are as people, and the way that they work. You can see where, like, you're almost, if you're the Bears, it's almost like you're giving yourself 2 shots at it by waiting, right? Like you're giving yourself a shot at it this year, and then if it works out with Justin, great. Then you're like cooking with gas going into 2024 because now you got all this capital from having traded the number 1 overall pick the year before. And if it doesn't work out, well, then you figure it out with a better quarterback class in front of you. I think that's sort of, at least if I'm Chicago, like I am like sort of looking at it where it's like if I take a quarterback first overall this year, that's it. Like I'm Ryan Poles, Matt Eberflus, like I'm hooking myself up to that quarterback because I just traded away a guy the team traded for 2 years ago, traded capital to get 2 years ago, versus almost giving myself 2 shots at it by waiting and seeing what happens with Justin Fields in 2023.
Albert Breer here on the Rich Eisen Show. Then on Wednesday, 1 o'clock Eastern, Eric DeCosta, Ravens general manager, followed an hour later by the coach who said 200% Lamar Jackson was going to return next year. That'd be John Harbaugh. What in the world is happening with the Ravens and Lamar Jackson at present, best you can tell?
Yeah, I think stalemate is the right term, and I mean, look, like I think that the Ravens genuinely love Lamar Jackson and genuinely want Lamar Jackson to be their starter for the next few years. But there's the other part of this, which is they've had 2 years to do this now, Rich, and if there was a compromise, I mean, like smart people get these things done. Like if there was a compromise to be done, wouldn't it be done by now, And to me, like that's the big thing that's hanging over all of this. Like you would think that if there was some sort of middle ground that they could have found between, like the fully guaranteed contract that Lamar wants and the top of the market, more traditional quarterback deal the Ravens have been offering. Well, then they would have found that middle ground by now, and they haven't. And so I think there's a very, very big decision coming over the next. I think it's 8 days when the deadline for the franchise tag comes, and that decision is going to be whether or not to put the exclusive or the non-exclusive tag on him, and this is going to be a very real tell. If they put the exclusive tag on him at $46 million a year, or $46 million for 2023, that means they're very, very serious about hanging on to Lamar Jackson and trying to get something done with Lamar Jackson because that takes him off the market for everybody else and would make it much harder for another team coming in that would trade for him to negotiate a long-term deal because the number's much higher. If they put the non-exclusive tag on him at $32 million, now all of a sudden we're open for business, and this thing could get really, really interesting really, really fast. So I think that's what you want to look for. Like they're at this stalemate, and I think the next big move is which of the 2 franchise tags the Ravens choose to put on Lamar Jackson. They're going to put one of them on him. It's just going to be a matter of which one.
I think they should put the non-exclusive on him. Let him go hunt. Say you go hunt. You go hunt. Like we're clearly not seeing eye to eye. We love you to the point where we're willing to let you go for yourself and see what is out there. And they, we know that allowing you to do this, we could lose you. But we at least have the backstop of 2 first overalls, and we know that prevents you from talking to a couple of teams that don't have first round draft choices in the next 2 drafts. We get it, but that will also allow maybe a little extra room to see Joe Burrow doesn't sign for fully guaranteed dollars. And Justin Herbert doesn't sign for fully guaranteed dollars. And Daniel Jones and Geno Smith and Derek Carr and and when Aaron Rodgers goes somewhere else, obviously he's already got a contract. But I think you get what I'm saying. Like this is the landscape, Lamar. Thing, right? It's not just us. I mean, it's everyone. So don't you think? Right?
What's interesting about this too, Rich? So you're mentioning the market for Herbert and Burrow, and those are no-brainers, right? I think we can agree. Like the Chargers, the Bengals, you got to do what you got to do.
Right, but those are, and I mentioned those, Albert, also because they don't have MVP, single season MVP trophy in the case like Lamar has. But the last 2 years, we've seen obviously from Burrow in particular within the division, like he's won the division, and so and finished the season and almost made the Super Bowl for a second straight year. This is a guy who has all the right to say every dollar guaranteed, like the guy in our division who had 20 some odd sexual assault allegations hanging over his head. Every penny should come to me. Yep. And if he doesn't do that, then you show that to Lamar also, right?
Yeah. And you know what? I honestly, I can't blame Lamar. I actually think,
I get it.
Huh?
No, I get it too.
No. Here's what's fascinating to me about it. I've told people I don't think this is all about the money, and they look at me sideways. If you're Lamar, just put yourself in Lamar's shoes for a second, okay?
Yes.
If you're Lamar, you have played out your rookie contract and taken on an unprecedented workload for a quarterback in the NFL. No one's ever run the ball, not even Cam Newton. No one's run the ball as much as Lamar's been asked to, and the whole offense has been built around his ability to run the ball, right? You've taken on that amount of injury risk. You've had 2 seasons end in a really bad way the last 2 years, in part as a result of that, right? So if you're Lamar and they're offering you a traditional quarterback contract, and that contract has, say, 2 or 3 years guaranteed and then 3 years in the back end that are non-guaranteed, aren't you going to look at the Ravens and sideways and say, wait a minute, after what I just did for you, you want me to give you injury protection 3 years from now? You know what I mean? So you're asking me after what I put my body through the last 5 years to give you injury insurance 3-4 years from now? I think that's a huge part of it. And so much of what Lamar's done is non-traditional, and so much of the things that he does are based on principle. I think that's a part of this. The other part that's interesting to me is what happens with the secondary quarterback market after your Burrows, after your Lawrences, because, if he is out there with a non-exclusive tag, that's going to be sort of, the pool he's going to be swimming in. The difference being, of course, that a team would have to give up 2 first-round picks and a contract to get him. And I think for the first time in a while, there are more quarterbacks with legitimate starting experience that are going to be out there than there will be starting jobs available. And so I think that's going to create a really, really interesting environment. I think it's why it behooves Carr to sign a deal before the market opens.
Yeah.
And you do wonder if there could be a situation, whether it's Geno or Jimmy or Daniel Jones, whoever it is, where the music stops and somebody doesn't have a seat. So I just think all these things are going to one's going to play into the next, going to play into the next. And you're right. Maybe the Ravens play is, well, we'll let you survey the market, Lamar, and see how all of this plays out. And please come back to us, and hopefully we can work something out. If whether the market kind of reveals itself in your favor or in our favor.
Albert Breer, before I let you go, a couple quick hitters. Jalen Ramsey on the trade block. What's going on there? What's happening? Give me the trade market.
I think this is an interesting pivot that the Rams are making. And I think where we saw them so aggressive with cap space and with draft picks to get veteran players, they were sort of the first adopters of that approach. I guess these the so-called FM picks approach.
Correct. Yep.
Now I think that they see where that early adopter advantage has run out, and they've run up a lot of debt, and they don't have a lot of high picks. And so I think that this is the beginning of the pivot point where they turn around and maybe they're a little more aggressive in the other direction, where they're starting to build up capital on the other end and starting to store cap space for down the line and take on some dead money now and build up some picks. So they'll be able to eventually take the step out of this era and not be completely crippled by everything that they did the last few years. So they're exploring it definitely. There's definitely a chance that they trade Jalen Ramsey. What's interesting about it to me is if you look at it, they got 5 players on their roster that have cap numbers of over $20 million. Jalen Ramsey is the only one of the 5 that's under 30. So, I think you look at it and you say, okay, he's a great player, but he's probably the one guy that maybe we can afford to walk away from that still has really, really good trade value. So let's see what we can get. And maybe that's the start of our process and getting more aggressive and shedding some cap dollars and building up some draft picks.
And then last one for you. You always got something interesting when asked a question like this. Give me the name, Albert Breer, of a team that is in the quarterback market, on the quarterback carousel, or winds up being on the quarterback carousel that we're not thinking of going into the combine right now.
Tennessee. I think Tennessee. You look at under a new general manager what they've done. I would expect. I think the Titans are going to at least explore everything now.
And what does that look like? What does that look like?
I mean, first of all, you look at the core of their team, their best players are getting older, right? So it's Derrick Henry, who's got a lot of miles on his legs, great player, but he's got a lot of miles on his legs now. Taylor Lewan obviously just got released, and he was a core guy for them. Jeffrey Simmons is going to need a new deal. Kevin Byard is sort of on the back nine too. So, you look at kind of where they are, and they're at this interesting point where they could either maybe go take a swing on an Aaron Rodgers, right, and try to get the most out of the last couple of years for some of those guys, or maybe this is where they turn the page and make a move up to get one of the rookies. So I think the fact that Ryan Tannehill's out of the guaranteed part of his contract, where he's got 1 year left and it's non-guaranteed, gives them some flexibility to at least look around. And I would say they're a team that I would look at as, maybe a week or two from now we're looking up and they've got a different starting quarterback.
What about Henry? Could he wind up on a team? I know I'm reading Bills fans chirping about it. I'm just throwing names out. What if the Cowboys take a swing on him? Why not?
That's the thing about it, Rich, is you got that. You sort of feel because of the age of some of those players, you're at a fork in the road, right? So it's do you go, if you go young quarterback, then yes. Right, then maybe it is time to see what you can get for Derrick Henry. If you're going Aaron Rodgers, obviously, absolutely not. You know what I mean? So I think I think what Tennessee does at quarterback, and they could just go forward with Ryan Tannehill too. Mm-hmm. But I think what Tennessee does at quarterback, and whether or not it's a young guy or an older guy, will dictate what happens with the other guys in their roster.
Albert, you're the man. Thanks again. I'll see you in Indy. I'll reach out as soon as I land.
Thanks, Rich.
Take care, sir. Well, not as soon as I land. I land at midnight, but I'll call you.
All right, cool.
Take care.
Cool.
There's Albert Breer. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.